Hi everyone. Telecom has done a very important story this week. It's by Editor Investigations Ashish Khaitan, and it looks into the continuing saga of the Telecom swindle. Before I go into the actual story, I just want to say that the whole telecom scandal has been a very complicated one, because even as there have been acts of blatant corruption, the policies themselves have benefited the consumers, and all of us are not only beneficiaries ourselves, but we see that every vegetable vendor, even stone cutters, construction workers today are able to possess a phone and are able to talk fairly cheap. And that is something we must acknowledge, even as we continue to try and nail down all the corruption and bad practices that accompanied all these telecom policies. This week, Ashish Khaitan's story focuses on Dayanidhi Maran, who was the telecom minister before A. Raja. By the same benchmarks that were used to nail A. Raja, this seems to be a much starker case of brazen favoritism and what seems to be for a financial quid pro quo. To run you through the story very quickly, when an Indian businessman called A. Sivasankaran owned Aircel, Dayanidhi Maran, in an inexplicable way, squeezed him for 2 years, refusing to give him telecom licenses that he had applied for. In fact, the committee report that has been put out by Justice Shivraj Patil, a retired judge, says that it was an undue and inexplicable delay. This forced Sivasankaran to finally sell Aircel to a Malaysian billionaire called Ananda Krishnan of the Maxis Group. Within months of Ananda Krishnan buying Aircel, Dayanidhi Maran released 14 licenses in extremely cash-rich circles. This took Aircel into being one of the top 7 telecom operators in the country and raised its evaluation to an exponential degree. Within 4 months of Aircel getting the licenses from Maran, Ananda Krishnan invested 700 crores into Sun TV, which was owned by Dayanidhi Maran's brother Kalanidhi Maran and his wife. In another interesting detail, which again goes to show the disproportionate nature and dubious nature of this transaction, almost simultaneously with Ananda Krishnan's investment of 700 crores into Sun TV, the Marans gave themselves an additional 12.6 crore shares, equity shares, but priced at a completely base level of rupee 1, while the Ananda Krishnan investment was at a 500-600% premium. This was to maintain the Maran's equities at a 80%, and it just shows that if a foreign investor is coming in at such a premium share and they are giving themselves shares at an absolutely base price, either the foreign investor is a fool, which is unlikely, or the Marans stand to gain a huge amount. So as I said, this strand also shows the dubious nature of this transaction, apart from the conflict of interest of a beneficiary investing so directly in the minister's company. Even if we don't count this as an obvious quid pro quo, it certainly comes across as a conflict of interest. But going, as I said, by the reasons that has put A. Raja in jail, this follows the exact prototype. We have detailed this story along with the timeline, with letters that Sivasankaran wrote to Maran, asking him why there is this delay, why they're not getting back to him. We also have a statement by Ananda Krishnan to the Malaysian Stock Exchange saying that their profits was generated 90% by their ownership of Aircel, whereas the permissible limit was only 74%. So there are lots of documents in the detailed story which backs up the main sinews of the story, which is what I have just outlined to you. What makes this story very, very important is not just the individual act of corruption, but because it is a stark example of the kind of crony capitalism that is crippling the country. So even when there are sectors that needed to be opened up, which needed entrepreneurship and which have benefited consumers, what is depressing about it is that it has been accompanied by a kind of feudal mindset where politicians have used power to favor particular businessmen and to do it in a way that goes against every norm of ethics and integrity. What also makes this story very important is that when the Supreme Court took up the 2G scandal, it had asked for the investigative agencies to go all the way back to 2001 when the telecom sector was opened up. So now, as the curtain comes down on the A. Raja story, which will still play itself out in the courts over time, the focus must shift to what all the ministers prior to him also did. That includes Mr. Maran, it includes Mr. Pramod Mahajan, and further back. If out of all this, what emerges is a more transparent corporate climate and a more transparent political climate, we will have gone a long way in achieving what we intended to do. Mr. Maran has told the media and others that he plans to sue Telecom. We have not as yet got the legal notice, but it really, given the nature of stories that we do, it's par for the course and is merely an intimidatory tactic. We stand by Ashish Khaitan's story. Do read the detailed story on our website or in the Telecom magazine, but because it will give you a sense of the timeline and the circumstantial evidence, which is very overwhelming. The investigative agencies are already, have already put Mr. Maran under the scanner. It now depends on how both the political establishment, the courts, and the media take this story further. Thanks for listening in.